Hello, this is the Gen 13 Files. It's a fan podcast about a group of superhuman teens named Gen 13. This is not my comic book, but was created by Jim Lee as well as J. Scott Campbell originally. I'll take you on a journey of their beginnings and through the various series that have existed. I'll talk about the transfer from Image to Wildstorm to DC. And I hope you enjoy this first episode about the first appearance of the group known as Gen 13. Today is on the Gen 13 Files, which this is the first episode of this podcast. I'm going to be going into Deathmate Black. Now, for those of you on video, this is what Deathmate Black actually looks like. It's pretty dark, pretty sinister, but you see some familiar characters such as Ripclaw, Maul from Wildcats, as well as Eric from Exo Manowar. Well, that's interesting. Well, what we're going to do, we're going to go through and give you a rundown of everything that happens in this book. Now, this is a really long story, and there's a lot to explain in it. But the funnest part about it is that this is an actual part of a 5-part series. It encompasses a prologue. It encompasses different colors of the Deathmate Black series, or Deathmate series. And so we're going to get into that. And for those on audio, you'll be able to hear this brief little intro that I'm going to give in an amazing voice. So right now, what I'm going to read you is the premise of Deathmate and how it goes. In a world that had long since become a terrible place, Solar reluctantly granted the wish of his lifelong companion, Gale, to dissipate the life-giving energy that has kept her alive and young for so long. So unable to contain his grief by her passing, Solar was literally split in two. The remaining Solar vanished into a life of seclusion, while the new persona went off to find other planes of reality to explore. There, in a dimension between what is real and what is unreal, he encountered a creature of incredible power, a woman from the distant universe, Void. The two fell in love, a love that would end all time, literally, upon consummating their combined energies fused, unwrapping the fabric of time, spiraling downwards and eating away at their distinct timelines. In an instant, things were not as they should be. Heroes fought alongside those who had been their enemies in a different world. Great men who would bring justice to the world died horrible, untimely deaths. Only men with the gift of foresight, Jeff McHenry and the Prophet, knew that all was not as it should be. Where they had seen the future so clearly before, there was now nothing. Jeff and Prophet are resolved to gather the heroes of this amalgamated universe together to fight the battle to save all time. So, we're going to go into this. The story originally was by Brandon Choi and Eric Silvestri. The art was done by a variety of people, specifically pencils and inks, Brandon Peterson, Scott Williams, Brett Booth, Sal Rega, Mark Silvestri, Jeffrey Scott, Alex Gardner, Scott Clark, Trevor Scott, Greg Capullo, Jim Lee, and Wills Portico. The colors were by Joe Chudio, Wendy Fouts, and Paige Apfelbaum. And the letters by Mike Heisler. So you can find this issue in most comic book stores, and if you want to follow along in my review of this issue. We start with our story with a narration from Caitlin Fairchild. This is an alternate future where the Valiant universe and the Image universe exist together. There's a much larger story going on, but that's another story. Caitlin tells about being raised in St. Louis, which is the capital of these Midwest territories. It's typical with problems such as disease, drugs, poverty, and even crime. The misery exists elsewhere with these in Sky City, and it's a giant structure that exists above the main city. It's a technological terror known as the Monumental Triumph. In the heart of the city lies Gateway. Now, the council's central base of operations is there, with their Wild Corp operatives and power suppressive systems that they rule the city with an iron fist. Everyone knows that they're puppet masters of the Troika, which include Mother May I, Eric, which is Exo Manowar, and Superstar. Mother May I is the brains, while Exos are the brawn. Superstar controls the Wild Corp through Sky Core and uses them to control more. Now there's more involved, and some of the slaves in this society are known as Lord Imp, Killjoy, Battalion, Misery, and Providence. Now some of these characters you may be familiar with from, say, the Wildcat series. These have become addicted to a cosmic juice, just from an entity known as Union. All this, Caitlin tells us before making this raid against the Troika. The rebellion that Gen 13 is trying to overthrow the Troika and the Sky City from oppression of the superhuman. Men walk the streets as they hear these propaganda messages of the Wild Corp, and Caitlin takes charge to start the offensive against the Troika. Mother May I is the ultimate target, and Mother May I is a parahuman telepath who runs everything. With her out of the way, everything will fall like dominoes. But they have to get there first. You hear the machines in the background as Mother May I sits with her soldiers, and her security informs her of the facts that Gen 13 have attacked the weapons depot. With all of this, she informs them that there's a mole in place working against the rebellion. Now, another character, Hotshot, she uses telekinesis with kinetic energy. Now, Hotshot tells Mother May I that the power suppression field has been damaged. Caitlin activates an explosion, as well as her team attacks the soldiers of Troika. Caitlin's team encompasses Burnout, who can burst into flames and fly like the Human Torch, Grunge, who fights with ferocity and can change his body structure more like a molecular change to consist of whatever he touches. Like if he touched a rock, his hand can become a rock and he can fight with that. Then we have Freefall, who uses gravity as a weapon. And then we have Rainmaker, who uses the power of the weather. They all battle against these foot soldiers of Troika, and Freefall makes a funny remark. It's such a rush having our powers back. Just hope the suppressors don't come back online before we're all done. Now, Mother May I notes that the rebels are attacking and have no suppression on their powers at hand. And two others come out of the shadows, which is Ripclaw and Turok. They come and attack the Gen 13 rebels, while Mother May I uses her Psyblast against Grunge. Ripclaw is then attacked by Caitlin, and she asks them, have you also become slaves to the Troika? Ripclaw, who is a cyber-enhanced being with razor claws as hands, can even extend those blades even further. He also possesses some psychic abilities, and he has Caitlin against a wall when he senses all of a sudden that she's not the enemy, but an ally. Caitlin is able to get away, even though her comrades are really captured. Hotshot kills Burnout with her Psy Blast. And even though Freefall, Grunge, and Rainmaker are captured, Ripclaw identifies them as worthy opponents. Turok feels they still are the enemy, and Hotshot kills Grunge with a swipe of her Psy Blade. And you see the blood in a panel destroy him. And then, with all the confusion, Ripclaw is outraged at this point that she's just committing these murders. And he wants to fight against Turok, but Turok holds a blade against his neck. Now Hotshot, she kills Freefall with the Psy Blast and feels that Ripclaw is betraying the Troika. As Ripclaw is being held by Turok, he shoves his elbow into Turok, and you can pretty much feel his oomph as he hits him. If this is what the council has to represent, then I can no longer serve as a master. I shall dedicate my life to its destruction. That's Ripclaw's words. Both Hotshot and Turok begin fighting against Ripclaw. Now Turok and Ripclaw fight against one another, blades against blades. Ripclaw fights against Turok with blood and sweat, and these two are brothers. And they fight, and Turok makes this statement, "I shall grant you a warrior's death, my brother. May the Great Spirit take you quickly to the final resting grounds." He fires a rocket arrow at Ripclaw as he reaches the height of this hill. And this is of great distress to Turok, who feels that he's losing a brother. Suddenly, the hill explodes, and all that's left is Ripclaw's arm and a giant hole. Now, all that is said is Turok saying the council, to Turok, I should say, is that the council shall reward you most handsomely. And Hotshot and Turok leave the scene, returning to the Sky City where Mother May-I waits. This next section is really important to the story. Ripclaw isn't dead. He only had his arm severed from his body. He falls into the underbelly of the city of St. Louis and lands in an alleyway where an old woman is pushing a cart and sees him fall. She knows he is escaping the jaws of death, and if she doesn't intervene, he's a dead man. So she takes him to a part of downtown to where everyone she's known by is the medicine woman. Now Ripclaw awakens and sees her as she truly is with his psychic ability. He says, "I've been given a power not unlike your own. At times, I look through the spirit and see a danger that threatens our very existence. Look to my spirit. You will see I speak truth." Now Ripclaw lets her peer into his mind, and he grasps her and kisses her gently, removing the cloak of time, and reveals her true self. The timeless spirit is Voodoo. She's a beautiful woman with long black-blue hair who has the powers of a telepath. Also, her tattoos reveal of her Native American origin. The next scene takes us to our next segment of this issue. We have the corporate headquarters of Stone Industries, and then Sky City. They communicate with Mr. Stone, specifically Eric, Exo Manowar. He's asking questions about why the Gen 13 rebels are able to gain access to this sophisticated technology. He also talks about how the security of the council is very important. When he switches off, Gunslinger tells Mr. Stone to be careful. But Mr. Stone is nice and calm until the messenger lets him know that they're visitors from the Wild Corp, which is very unusual. Suddenly, Mr. Stone grows to an enormous size, becoming Maul, a giant who can change size at will. Enter Voodoo and Ripclaw. Voodoo speaks for Ripclaw, and it's a warm reunion between Maul and Voodoo. Ripclaw sits down, and Maul is able to take him to his lab to figure out if there's something wrong with the world. and it finalizes Ripclaw's decision in escaping the true Wild Court. For this part, we end this scene with Gunslinger, Maul, Ripclaw, and Voodoo coming to a decision to join the Gen 13 rebels as they fight and to get in touch with them so they can contact Union. Now, Union, being held by the Troika and being drained of energy, is forcibly addicting Lord Imp and others to that power. Now, Voodoo ends this scene by saying, I feel as though we've been given a second chance to be heroes again, to change the world and reclaim our future. The next scene shows us how once the powerful council is hooked up to wires and computers and is draining the life energy of the group, including Lord Imp, as well as the great powerful Union. The Sky City prevents these from escaping, and only Union is aware of the dimensional rift that continues to grow and it must be stopped. Now, Mother May-I is significantly upset and tired of this distraction that's been facing her. With the wars against the Gen 13 rebels, she tells Superstar to power up security. And suddenly, an alarm sounds. There's an increased activity with Lord Imp, and Eric Exo Manowar says that Union feeds Lord Imp power. Now, Lord Imp sees the future of the universe, and Oblivion is only a heartbeat away. And so Exo triggers this purge that rips the power away from Union and Lord Imp. And Superstar says that Union is overriding the system. Now, Exo's hand glows with power, and he's said he's tired of living under the shadow of the council, and he rams his fist into the power and cuts off the source to the council. Now, Mother May-I objects vehemently, saying, "You fool! What have you done? Without that power, the entire Sky City will collapse." The type of character that Exo shows is that he smiles and that the council's readings stabilize. No need to jeopardize the plans, and the mole is still in place. So as the Troika feel that they've gained a victory inside of the Gen 13 rebels, there's a secret meeting taking place in a warehouse downtown. Now the rebels are forming at a tunnel to get into the city and the Sky City above. Now Maul discusses how Voodoo didn't have the stomach for the political games that existed, and so Maul had planted himself inside so that the rebels could get in at one point. And so then it's a reveal that he opens the door to the tunnel, and who stands there? The brave and confident Caitlin Fairchild. She suddenly recognizes Ripclaw and warns everyone of his presence, that thinking that he followed them. She attacks him and rams her fist into his chest, sending him to the floor, and all the group are standing around her and that he's one of them now. And so they're trying to convince her of that. And they fill Caitlin in on everything that's taken place, especially with the end of the universe. And I love it how with Maul, he says, we lose this battle, we've lost for all time. Now the rebels need to gain security clearance, and only Caitlin knows where they can get that. And it's in a church beneath the Sky City. And it's the one person that they're seeking at the base of the gateway. The next scene is showing in a bottom panel, showing us our heroes approaching a lone chapel at the very base of the Sky City. Ripclaw says he will see it to the end and even calls Maul his brother, and there's no one else for him now. We enter a darkened room with candlelights and a lone nun standing before a lit cross. She feels she's failed. Once she was the feared member of the Troika. She faked her death and now has become the leader of the Gen 13 rebels. Out of the darkness, her face is revealed, and she is Ballistic, her name. She sees a vision of Union before her, and perhaps there's more answers for her to seek. Now enter our grand array of heroes. And Ripclaw, he makes a speech that the Great Spirit has chosen them to embark on this perilous journey against powerful foes. Life hangs in the balance, but he wants her to join them. Now it's a time for miracles. It's just, people don't talk that way in comics anymore, and it really gets lost on just action in the comic instead of an actual story. Clearly, though, the leader, Ballistic, outlines her plans to shut down the power, or to show that the power grid is what they need to take out. And from there, Union can then help further. There's soldiers, enforcers of the Wild Corp, and Troika. They're guarding everything around it. Maul constructs a jammer to neutralize the suppressors, and he hopes that it's enough. And lastly, they need to get through the gateway's early warning and perimeter defense system, and so Caitlin volunteers for that. But Ballistic says one last thing. Caitlin's not to go up into the Sky City. The whole gateway will come crashing down, and none will probably walk away from it. She says that enough lives have been lost, and it will be up to Caitlin to reestablish order and bear the burden of that leadership. So with Ballistic and Maul discussing how they're so outnumbered, Maul mentions one who did fight bravely with Lord Imp, and his name is Warblade. And with all of them discussing the matter, Warblade appears out of nowhere. Some have thought that he died, and his death was greatly exaggerated, and everyone announces Warblade! And the journey has begun to its bitter end. The next scene we find is Voodoo, Maul, and Warblade and Ripclaw entering the control center through the access tunnels. They climb a long ladder upward, and the shock soldiers there are waiting them. Both Ripclaw and Warblade attack with great ferocity, and Warblade and Voodoo announce that they're in. Ripclaw feels, however, that the battle is too easy, and things are going on too quietly. And as they go up the elevator even higher, the doors to the control center open, and one shot from a special arrow from of course, Turok, takes out Maul. And Gunslinger activates the jamming device against the suppressors. And so Voodoo attacks Turok, flinging herself into the air, and all her arms, all his arms, let's see, all he arms himself with is one knife. Now that's less than it's good to deal with a person like Voodoo. And so here he's fighting against Voodoo, and suddenly Ballistic steps in and takes out Turok, preventing Voodoo from being killed. Now her gun blasts through Turok as if he were tissue paper. And Ballistic makes it clear she's not there to fight Voodoo's battles. However, they don't have time to waste, and she's actually used her full vengeance. So Ripclaw attacks the soldiers full force, and Warblade is kind of taken aback by it, and knowing that Ripclaw wants him to attack, but there's something that's preventing him. That's still amiss about Warblade. There's too many questions going on at this point. Now at this point, Maul breaks through the line of soldiers, and he says, "Hope you don't mind it if I crash the party, little boys." And Maul tells Ripclaw and Warblade that he's just stunned by the arrow and now is bigger and better. He holds on to all the soldiers he can and plunges them over the side of the Sky City, plunging down into the city below. Ripclaw clearly wants to continue, so Maul's death is not in vain. Now, Ballistic and Gunslinger and Voodoo continue and see that the Council's sanctum is just ahead. The Troika is through and attacking them thoroughly. Now, Eric Exo Manowar attacks Ballistic and didn't realize that she was leading the rebellion with Gen 13. Ballistic attacks him full force, knowing that his suit has a specific weakness. Exo gives it his all and blasts against Ballistic, taking out her cybernetic eye. Her systems are beginning to shut down, and before she's left to die, She tells Voodoo how to defeat him. Voodoo uses her sight after realizing that Exo's suit is actually a separate entity, and it forces him out, and now he's completely vulnerable. Ballistic, Superstar, and then Exo all blast against each other, killing them in a frenzy of explosive power. Now back in the control center, the explosion caused a feedback loop to rip through Skycore's power grid. With all the smoke and debris, Warblade asks where everyone is, and Ripclaw explains they're all gone, and it's up to them to finish the fight. Now Voodoo calls out that Ballistic and Gunslinger gave their lives to take out the power grid. Mother May-I is still alive, and Warblade claims they should leave, thinking that the fight is over. There's nothing more they can do. But things just don't seem right with Warblade. And it's up to them to finish the fight. And Ripclaw knows they need to. And so Voodoo calls out that Ballistic and Gunslinger gave their lives so they could take out the power grid. Now, Mother May-I is still alive. Warblade has said they need to leave, but Mother May-I screams, impossible. She has to finish this herself. She goes on to take control of the power that Union and the Council have alone. And once she's disposed of the rebels, she would be able to lead them as queen. She will fight with all her might, and Ripclaw breaks through the wall. Entering the command center, Mother May-I attacks Ripclaw with her full force. When Ripclaw realizes that Warblade is actually working with Mother May-I the whole time, he is the mole. Warblade shoves his blade into Ripclaw, and Mother May-I urges him with the thought, there's so much more pleasure if you prolong the pain. Ripclaw then calls out to forgive him for the Great Spirit, and he's failed and lost. But all isn't lost. Union answers him and says, hear me, brave warrior. Your sacrifice has not been in vain, for there is still another. Release your pain and suffering. Your place is among your ancestors now. And Mother May-I feels that the fight is over. She feels that she's kept her mind lock over Warblade, and suddenly it fails because Warblade fights back, and he instantly realizes that she had control over him and says, I am ending your reign of terror. And Voodoo mentally attacks Mother May-I with all her strength and shows her that Warblade is actually a true hero. And he had just lost himself. Mother May-I attacks back at Voodoo, killing her with a psychic blast, and with the power conduit and the siphon that the council has, the energy feedback quickly grows more enormous. Mother May-I, she still is alive after this huge explosion. From all the others that she thought that she was feeling victorious, and an energy shot fires at her from a distance, and you can just see the urethral spirit form of Union, and with him is Lord Imp. They've been released. Warblade may have betrayed them once briefly, but he came through in the end. And Warblade holds Voodoo in his arms and says, I let you down. Everyone is dead because of me. And Lord Imp offers him comfort, knowing that it wasn't his fault when it was not in his power. And Union must go. He had to get justice against this alternate dimension and to stop the universe from collapsing. Now Lord Imp, he looks up at the moon and the glowing image of Union as he shoots himself to the stars and says, we will wait and pray that Union succeeds. The gateway power grid is then destroyed, and the Sky City anti-gravity stabilizers are turned off. And so soon, the city is suddenly crumbling into the lower city. Warblade searches for Ripclaw's body, but it has vanished. And he says, do you think the future's been changed, Lord Imp? Was it all worth it? Lord Imp responds, it already has started. The Sky City explodes in a furious ball of fire and aftershock. Caitlin Fairchild looks up at the destroyed city, and Ballistic was right. Without the power from the council, the gateway simply collapses. She can feel the power being brought into the group. Her strength is returning full force. And once the gateway is out of the way, the children of this 13th generation will claim what is rightfully theirs, the future. Union responds to Caitlin mentally, assuming there is a future waiting for us. Caitlin feels it's her responsibility to begin down on the ground. Nothing will ever be the same, not even the past. Caitlin stands alone among the rubble and says, I could live with that. Thus, the issue ends for this part of Deathmate in the series. This is only our introduction to some of these characters of Gen 13, and will, of course, see Caitlin Fairchild be a true leader as we examine Gen 13, the series. At least in this universe, she's a leader right here. So I've got a few pages that I've really found to be really cool. One of those pages really strikes me as amazing is the fact that let's see if I can find it here. Okay, it's on page 1, and you'll see here in the video how it looks. There's a lot going on in that page, but you see the true scope of the Sky City and how immense it is, the whole city, and with Exo Manowar standing right in the middle of it. The highlight is the fact that there's so many members of even the Valiant universe, but also the Image and Wildstorm universe. And the expansive city is above this lower city, and it's almost like they use the arch as the basis for their Sky City. And so Exo Manowar is standing there brave and blinded by the idea of what they're doing is wrong. Now, another page that really stands out in my mind is the splash page on page 6, where Ripclaw is attacking Grunge and Mother May I and is in the foreground. Now, it seems a bit much, but the amount of action in that scene really heightens what is happening for the effect of the battle going on. And so you can see on page 6 here, let's see here if I find it right. Here we go. Yeah, it's this right here. This whole scene illustrates everything going on in that picture and how there's a ton of action really going on. And if you have a chance to really to pick up this comic, it's amazing. The artwork is top notch. And then with this, the last page that really stands out to me is on page 13, where we see the arrow that Turok shoots at Ripclaw and explodes, and Ripclaw looks back at him shouting, "No!" And it's an amazing piece of storytelling in that one page. Now let me show it to you, because this is truly pretty cool. I really liked it. Here it is. This one on the right. This one page is just really fantastic, because you think that Ripclaw's dead on this page here. Now, those of you on the audio podcast, you won't be able to hear it or see it, but if you're watching video, you can. So from there, let's look at some of the panels. Like on page 6, once again, not only is it one of my favorite pages, but it also is one of my favorite panels for the fact that it shows such intense emotion from Grunge's face when he's attacked viciously by Ripclaw, and then psychically by, Mother May I. And it's an action-packed scene. The next panel I really liked was found on page 10, where Ripclaw is jabbing Turok in the stomach. There's an intense amount of fighting action in that one panel, And it shows Turok's arrows falling out of his quiver, and Ripclaw's expression is full of emotion and grit. So let me show you on the video where that is, because I really like it and I think it tells the story really well. I'm sure as you go through some of these things, it's really fascinating and fun. So it's this panel here, and it's showing you what Ripclaw looks like and how he's pushing his elbow into Turok. I think it's just great, the level of detail that they put into that scene. And then another panel that I really like is on the same page, and it shows like Freefall's face, and she's crying and feeling this pain from Hotshot's blast. And I just love how the artist can show this this emotional connection in this issue. And the next panel that I really enjoyed is found on page 16, where we get the true reveal of Voodoo in her true form. It's gorgeous, and she shows that she isn't just beautiful, but a very strong female. So those on video, I'd like to show you that. I like it. It's pretty cool. It's this one here. So yeah, I like it. But it's a panel that I really have enjoyed for that. And maybe I'm just a sucker for Voodoo. So that pretty much, sums up a lot of the things that are happening in this. And the next two panels are simply pure action. And it takes place on page 40, where Mother May-I stumbles up from her battle with Warblade and Voodoo, and Union shoots her with this giant beam of energy. And it's a bright blue and white light, while Mother May-I is simply in shadow and black. And it's a perfect end to such an evil villain. And then the last panel that I really liked is simply on page 42, which is a splash page, and it encompasses the whole page while Caitlin stands strong and tall. Behind her, the Sky City is exploding with a dazzling display, and below her is the various Gen 13 groups that have gained their powers and represented by this orange glow. And it's a wonderful panel showing us the strength of her character, and as we'll get even in the actual series, and we'll see much more of Caitlin's power in another universe that isn't about to collapse. And if you haven't read the Deathmate series, I urge you to read it. The final two issues really sum up the story, and even though Caitlin doesn't feature in them, we know that she and her team will come back for the actual series of Gen 13. So for those of you on video, I'd like to show you that last panel of what I really liked. It's this whole page of her just standing tall and the Sky City exploding in the background. And it really highlights the strength of her character. So today, this being my very first comic book review podcast, I wanted to thank the Rad Adventure Network for their inspiration on giving me the courage to go ahead with this podcast. I'd also like to thank Bat Books for Beginners for the same type of inspiration. My podcast seems to be a variation on both of those, and I hope they can appreciate how I've worked on this project. Now, I'd also like to thank Amont Plesner for the music I've used in this episode, as well as using the royalty-free music for movies and videos, which you can find on Amazon. And also the sound effects are from various other royalty-free sources. Those of you on video won't see this or hear that. I want to thank you for listening. And as always, this is a podcast that appreciates the story and art of Jim Lee, J. Scott Campbell, as well as other various artists as we go along in the series. It's also for appreciation for them that I do this podcast. It's just a fan podcast, and I enjoy the actual fan experience of it. So a couple other sources I'd like to thank are Krypton Comics in Omaha, as well as Legend Comics and Coffee, for frequent visits to their shops to buy the issues of Gen 13. I'd also like to thank Ruth and Darren Sutherland for their support. So you can email me at thegen13files@mail.com. As I've said before, this is a fan podcast, and I'm not associated with Jim Lee, DC Comics, or J. Scott Campbell. So until next time, happy reading.